Okay, so with spring not so quickly approaching at this point in time, I figured it was a good time to talk about what some of the best springtime lures would be, especially here in Iowa. And I realize that springtime can vary depending upon what part of the country that you're in. But as far as like being here in Iowa, I figured I would limit my choices basically to the baits that would be most effective for that springtime period, especially like early spring into like pre-spawn, and then not so much the spawn and post-spawn transition, but basically your water temperatures anywhere between like 45 degrees and like 60 degrees right before they start moving up to really get on beds and get into the spawn. So and again, some of these lure choices are going to be better depending upon the type of cover that you have in your lake. So some of these are going to be better choices for weed-based lakes, or some of these will be better choices if your lake is not weed-based, if it's a reservoir that has a lot of rock cover or maybe some standing timber. Um, so without further ado, like I'll just kind of start and get into it and kind of go from like coldest water temperatures to as it warms up. For my first choice, when it's super cold water temps, the best thing is a jerk bait. And I know that this has been a repeated, a repeated knowledge along the lines of using a jerk bait in fairly cold water. I have caught fish on a jerk bait in water that still has ice on it in the spring. When fish seemingly don't want to bite at all, they will hit a jerk bait. Now, this comes with a bit of a caveat in the fact that the water needs to be clear enough for the bass to see it. And I'm sure that someone out there will comment on this video like, oh, I caught, I had a 50 fish day in the water when it was like only a foot of visibility. Well, okay, good on you. But for the most part, jerk baits don't work all that well in cloudy water. For that, you're going to want to go to a different option, which I will showcase here very soon. If the water is fairly clear, I'm talking like greater than 2 foot of visibility and cold, the jerk bait is the way to go, especially early in spring, because you can pause it for basically as long as you want. That day that there was ice on the lake, we were pausing our baits for 20 seconds or more when we were getting those bites. You got to give the fish time when they're cold and slow to get to where the bait is and eat it. Okay. Next one in the arsenal, rattle trap. I catch probably more fish in the early spring on these little turds than literally anything else. They're fantastic when that water temp starts to climb into the upper 40s, mid to upper 40s, like 46 to, again, 60 degrees when the spawn starts. Then, I mean, you can throw a rattle trap any time of the year, rip it out of weeds, all that good stuff. And the way you present the rattle trap will change depending upon the time of year. This is just a simple Strike King Red Eye Shad. I have a lot of luck with them. I like them a lot. They do really well for me. Now back to the water temp. This is going to be a presentation that you're going to use in those colder water temperatures if that water is more cloudy, especially if that water is more cloudy. It puts off a lot of noise. It allows those fish to hone in on it. Those fish know exactly where it's at. Not to mention, they are fairly snag proof when it comes to rocks. Places where square bills get hung up easily, you can snap these out of the rocks, no problem at all. It's very convenient. I love rattle traps. I catch a ton of fish on them. And I think last year I caught my largest bass on the rattle trap. Now, again, that comes with a bit of a caveat too, because I didn't bass fish that much last year. But needless to say, love rattle traps, especially early in the spring, late in the fall, cold water. They're awesome. Again, as kind of the water temperatures warm up into those low 50s, a good bet and presentation is the jig. And now a lot of people are going to be like, well, the jig is a year-round bait, which it totally is. You can use the jig anytime throughout the year. It is a fantastic bait. This one just happens to have a rage tail skirt on it. Just your classic Alabama craw pattern. Catch a ton of fish on this thing throughout the course of the year. But in the spring is one of the times when the jig really shines. Those fish are looking for a big meal. Those females want those extra nutrients in order to get those eggs ready for the spawn. Males for the same reason. And the jig is just a staple of the spring, especially as those water temps start to warm up into the 50s, clear through the spawn. You can use it in the spawn, post spawn, all that stuff. But the jig is one of those baits that shines in early spring, virtually weedless. You can throw it in the thickest cover. You can throw it on rocks. You can throw it in weeds. Again, you may want to adjust the style of jig that you're using if you're going to use it in weeds. Or rocks. There are better style jigs for those applications, and I can get into those at another time. But for the spring, the jig is one of the staples, one of the only 5 lures that you need in Iowa if you're springtime bass fishing. Okay. As that water continues to warm up, I'm actually going to go to like the chatterbait first, or a bladed jig, a swim jig. It puts off a kind of a subtle shimmy and shake when that trailer is on there. Something important to reference with the chatterbaits that I think goes underscored a lot and people don't talk about often enough is that you need to have a trailer of some kind on that chatterbait. For the explicit purpose of allowing there to be enough mass for that bass when it opens its mouth and creates that vacuum to suck the prey in, there needs to be mass there to take on that suction, basically, so then that way the prey gets consumed. If you don't have a trailer on that lure, then that does not happen. The bass is just basically sucking water and you lose the fish or miss the fish, or the fish may not even ingest the lure at all. So that's an important thing that goes, I don't think it's stated enough. This is just a Reaction Innovations little dipper that's on there. You can use whatever jig you're comfortable with. I've seen people use Mr. Twisters. You could use other swim bait styles. This is just something that I am comfortable using, that I've had a lot of success with. And in place of the chatterbait, if you wanted a more subtle option, a swim jig is always a good choice in the spring too, especially on weedier bodies of water. Chatterbait shines in the weeds. It basically just chops right through them. One of the places where the chatterbait doesn't shine as much is in heavy wooded cover. They have a tendency to roll over logs and get hung up a little bit more. If you make accurate casts and swim it around some of that cover, it's not nearly as big of a deal, but sometimes when those fish are really holding tight to that cover, a chatterbait may not be the best option, and again, that's why you've got the jig. So continuing as the water warms up, I mean, basically once you get to the 52 to 53 degree range, like, you're really good with either of these options. And again, the spinnerbait is just such a spring staple for me. I've had really good luck and success with the spinnerbait in the spring over the past couple of years. Granted, I'm not throwing it in 47, 48 degree water, but I have had a lot of luck with it as that water continues to warm. And it's another one of those baits where people are like, oh, you can throw it any time of the year, and that is very true, especially if you're slow rolling it. There are endless applications for the spinnerbait, and it is such an effective lure in the spring, and it is, aside from that, a big fish bait. In a tournament, if you are needing a kicker fish, a spinnerbait or a jig is always a good option to go to for those big bites. Those big profiles attract those bigger fish, and they love them. So these are just my hot takes on the best 5 lures in Iowa for springtime bass fishing. Now, I'm sure that I left something out, but when you try and limit it to 5, you're trying to cover a lot of time and a lot of different conditions with varying lures. Again, if you like these tackle tips, please feel free to comment. I'll try and do my best to address any of the tips or any of the questions that you guys have with my own knowledge. If you have questions about setups, like what I choose to throw these lures with and why I do that, I'm planning on releasing a gear video kind of relating gear ratios with reels, baits, and then rod actions as well. So if you have questions about those things, please feel free to ask, so then I can include that in those videos as well. I'm going to try and release like a summertime and maybe even a fall top 5s for Iowa. I'm sure that these top 5 videos have been done before, and like I said, this is just my take based on my experience, but these 5 lures I've put a lot of fish in the boat on and have a lot of confidence in the spring on them, and they have all made me money in the past. As always, thank you guys for watching. I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.